Hello, and welcome, friends. Welcome to another edition of Horn of Africa TV Conversations. Excuse me. With me, as always, is my good friend and comrade, Professor Mohamed Hassan. How are you today, Mohamed?
I'm okay, except it is very cold here in Belgium, but I'm okay.
It's still cold, huh?
Yes, but it will gradually change, they said, according to the...
Let us hope so. Well, it's another week, and as we promised, we have come back. Today, we're going to focus on Somalia, the third pillar of the new Horn of Africa. Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia have formed now a peace agreement, a peace and friendship agreement, and cooperation, of course. So we need to focus more on Somalia this time around, and we will depend on your expertise and your insight and analysis. To begin, give us a very brief background of the historical background of how Somalia came to be independent in 1960, who was colonizing what part of Somalia, and then the state formation, 1960s up to the state collapse, 1990. But the historical background should be very brief because we need to focus on the post-1990 situation, if you please.
Thank you very much. I will make it very brief. Once the Suez Canal was opened, the canal vision or the project of the canal was a French, but later on British capital took it over, and it made an operation with the Egyptian body, and it opened the canal. This canal is one of the most important canals in world history. It shortened the trip between London or Liverpool and Bombay or India by 9,000 kilometers. It shortened. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it is the engine of the British industrialization. Once it was that open, the French realized that, and they have occupied the northern Djibouti, Ubuk, and then they expanded until now where it is Djibouti, and they created the French Somaliland, as they call it.
Of course, at that time in Europe, the two great contending powers were France and United Kingdom.
Yes. By that moment, even Germany was not unified.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Germany was unified in 1870 by Bismarck, and Italian unification later on came also by 1863. So what happened is that it is just the scramble also, as a product of that the scramble for Africa became very important. The French took over Djibouti, and before that also in 1839, the British took over Aden to protect their British India.
Aden, that is South Yemen.
South Yemen.
Yes.
Then once Italy was unified through Garibaldi in 1863, the British subsidized the Italians to colonize Somalia, and they paid money.
And colonize Eritrea as well.
To colonize Eritrea as well. That what they call it, the airbag between the imperialist forces, that there is something must be in between before they go to clashes. So Italian colonialism was subsidized by Great Britain, and an officer, he went to Yemen and he went to Hadramaut and organized and tried to form soldiers. He brought the soldiers and to Puntland now, what they call to Bosaso, and from there he started intervening down to the south. It took them for almost 15 years. The revolt of the Somali people, they couldn't succeed to penetrate until 1905. And on the other side, German colonialism also later on started. Tanganyika was taken over by Germany, Burundi, and Rwanda, and so on. And the German imperialists also, they had an appetite of the southern what they call the Kismayo crisis in the southern region. And finally, the Italians colonized and created southern Somalia. And in the north, the British wanted food, especially like dairy and milk and meat and so on for their soldiers. They also took over gradually Somaliland. And from there also, they have taken a lot of Somaliland citizens to be stationed in Yemen, southern Yemen, and they were the third biggest community probably after the British. They are the second biggest community in southern Yemen, in Aden. They constitute about 80,000 of them at the end. So in this way, colonialism have taken over Somalia. The north became the British colony or protectorate, as they call it. British have a lot of names for their colonies, and the south was an Italian colony. Finally,
there was the fierce resistance against the British by Sheikh Mohamed Abdullah Hassan.
Yes, there was a fierce resistance.
That took 20 years, am I correct?
Indeed, it was one of the longest guerrilla war in African history, and probably the first bombardment of planes have been used there against him. The British gave him a nickname, the Mad Mullah. And there is also in southern Somalia, there is a very big resistance which took until 1915. So Italy gradually consolidated her colonies in the south, and Britain consolidated her colonies in 1920. In this process, when Italian fascism developed in Italy after 1922, in fact, you could say from 1920, some progressive Italians and communists, they start running away. And once fascism took over the power in Italy, then it is some communist and some progressive element in Italy surrounded, and they were deported to Somalia as a prison or as an exile. So you could, once they were there and communicating and talking to the young people and so on, these progressive Italians also, they created the embryo of nationalism in Somalia. The contribution of Italian progressive element who came as prisoners and exiled individuals played an important role. After that, of course, also the independence of Egypt in 1952, the officers taking over, Radio Cairo broadcasting in Somali and Arabic and so on. This have incited a lot of young people, and finally nationalist sentiment developed in Somalia, and SYL was created, what they call the Hanulato movement.
That's the Somali Youth League was in the forefront of this nationalist movement, right?
Indeed, yes. So finally, in 1960, first the northern part got independent. After a week, the south got the Somali Republic. Of course, one of the most important elements to take, which connected it to the situation now, that once the civilian government took over and became an independent state, the first president and his delegation, the delegation he have sent is to build the national army. The national army, they went first to the Italians. The Italians, they said, no, Somalia, you are too small country. You don't need a national army. You need a carabinieri, sort of gendarme. Then they went to France. France also rejected, Britain rejected, and the United States also refused. And of course, after that, they went to Moscow. And you could say the embryo of the Somali National Army was supported and created and advised by the Soviet Union. The first officers who went to study in the Soviet Union was the late President Abdullah Yusuf, and including General Aideed and all this. They are officers who have been trained. Of course, after Egypt's change, also there were some Somali young people who joined the Colonial Harbiya, as they call it, Academy of War. In Egypt, they were also trained in Egypt and came back home. So the main issue is that it is that the imperialist forces, particularly United States, didn't want this Somali nationalism, and finally handed over also the Howd and the reserved area in the Ogaden to Ethiopia. And the fear that it is Ethiopia was the bastion of the region. Haile Selassie's regime was considered the anchor state of the time. and so on. And they didn't want to disturb. And finally, of course, there was war between Somalia and Ethiopia in 1964, which is the Eritrean origin general who led on the Ethiopian side, General Andom. On the other side was also his Colonel Abdullah Yusuf, who had fought with his troops against the Ethiopians, and of course, General Andom also from the Ethiopian side. And finally, of course, Somalia continued by civilian government until 1969. Then by 69, the army took over until 1990, until the collapse of the state in Somalia. This is one part of Somalia. Next time we will go deep. What is the reason for the collapse? What are the conditions which brought to the collapse? What are the contradictions from outside and inside? We will explain that. And then why it continued the civil war for a very long time. We will discuss about it today. What happened is that in 1990, January, President Barre left the palace and went out, and the state collapsed. After the collapse...
if I may interject here, though, in the civil war, of course, Mengistu's regime, military regime of Ethiopia, did support some of the forces that were fighting against the government of Siad Barre, right?
Indeed. The first movement which it came that it is the SSDF, the Somali Salvation Front, which is led by Abdullah Yusuf. And then the second one came of Somali National Movement of the North. And then the last one is that it came of the south of Mogadishu area, which is led by General Aideed. In that way, that finally the regime collapsed and the civil war started. The civil war started because of the contradiction in the UAC. UAC is a third organization, which they call it the HoA organization. It's in the south. And when General Aideed and Ali Mahdi, they were leading it, and finally in the Djibouti conference, that it is without consulting General Aideed, they have appointed President Ali Mahdi, and this triggered the civil war, and the civil war which happened between Ali Mahdi forces, UAC, and General Aideed, and the destruction of Mogadishu came from that point of view. But at the same time, on May 1991, that it is Mengistu left the country, fled away, and in May 1991, the TPLF took over in the name of EPRDF, took over the power, and
in Ethiopia.
In Ethiopia. So now here is the main, to reconnect, the main objective or the main purpose after TPLF in the name of EPRDF took power until 1995, it was a process of consolidation. Consolidation. They knew they are a minority organization. The umbrella organization, in fact, it is a fake one, which is called the EPRDF. They are the one who created it. And finally, the last one was created after 1991, what they call the Sovereign People. They just a mishmash, they brought it together and they put it, and it became an alliance of four organizations, which is TPLF, OPDO, the Oromo organization, and then the Amhara organization, which is from the EPDM, which is the Tamrat Laine, the previous prime minister who was leading it, was forced to change their name into Amhara organization, and then they created the Southern People. Once they have done this, they created EPRDF, which is first in paper, later on in practice, and thirdly in hegemonic sense. And TPLF's vision is very simple after that. While they are consolidating, the first internally they have to consolidate their power. What does it mean in concrete? That it is once they have created the transitional government, the major contender, at least not in a national sense, but in Oromia, was the OLF. So gradually OLF have to be eliminated according to their view. And after OLF also, another group, another organization have to be eliminated, and that is the political wing of the ONLF, Ogaden National Liberation Front, the political wing. The third is the Sidama National Movement of Walda Manuel Dubala. They have eliminated one by one all of them, and they consolidated their power. And after they consolidated their power, they used three items to continue and consolidate and prepare also the contradiction in the future. The first is the so-called free press. They continuously, from 1992 on, and 1993 even aggressively. By 1993, Eritrea made a referendum and got an independent, and it became a sovereign state. But they were inculcating propaganda, anti-Eritrean propaganda inside the country, by saying that Eritreans are smuggling and contraband and so on into the country. There are unfair competition in the economy, and so on and so on. They don't say it directly through their television and radio, official radio and television, but it is the intelligence service, particularly Kimfe, was subsidizing all these gutter presses which is published in Addis Ababa to inculcate and to maintain this anti-Eritrean sentiment among the Ethiopian population, and particularly in the capital cities and little bit also in other cities and so on, subsidized by them. But after they consolidated and eliminated what they call a threat, which is the OLF, the ONLF, the Sidama, and so on, and consolidated, they created drafting committee of the constitution, which is only belongs to them. And finally, they drafted the constitution, and then they created the constitutional assembly. And then finally, from that also, they made a referendum, as they call it, and they rectified the constitution. They made the election in 1995, and they won, and they became official or officially a legal government of Ethiopia. In the process, at that moment, until 1994, beginning 95, I was member of Ethiopian embassy in Brussels. Happened to be president of Uganda. He wanted, and then also the late Abdurrahman Babu and the late Dr. Tajuddin from Nigeria, they met me, particularly Abdurrahman Babu met me in Brussels, and he asked me that I have to arrange for them a trip to Ethiopia because they wanted to discuss with the leadership in Ethiopia, and they want a solidarity support that they wanted to organize the 7th Pan-African Congress in Uganda. So I arranged for them the trip. They went to Addis Ababa. After that, they went even to Eritrea. They met also the leadership in Eritrea and so on. And then when they come back, I met also Abdurrahman Babu, and he said that we are organizing a very big group, and it will be the first Congress in African continent, the 7th Congress of Pan-Africanism. And that Congress was organized in Uganda. Happened to be, I was invited to go there, and that it is the star or the main guest was General Aideed. Now, General Aideed, after it is contradiction with American troops there and
the Black Hawk Down incident.
Hawk Down. Yes, the Black Hawk Down. He became a little bit a celebrity in the world, and then he was invited to Uganda, and it was at the stadium, and it was a very big population. And in support of him, he became a national hero of Africa, you could say, and so on. But I talked to him, and then he talked to me also, and he told me, Mohamed, my son, I'm coming to Addis Ababa. I would like to talk to this Tigrayan regime. And he came to Addis. And I met him also in Addis. After that, I have to leave. I didn't continue my discussion. But TPLF understood that as long as General Aideed alive, and General Aideed have certain popular base, and secondly, because of he's an old officer in the Somali army, and if we try to provoke inside Somalia, it might ignite and it might be even a counterproductive. And they waited until, and they are lucky that it is General Aideed was killed, and then they made their own election themselves, and after that, they continued. What is TPLF view on the whole of Africa? This is the most important.
Mm-hmm.
TPLF views that it
but
is...
Before you go, though, to that core issue of TPLF's hegemonic view in the Horn of Africa, between 1990, the state collapse, and say 95, 96, what was happening in Somalia, the civil war between various warlords or General Aideed's faction and the other factions? What was the major point of contention, or why was this civil war continuing? Why stability couldn't come to Somalia after the collapse of the Siad Barre regime?
First of all, is the USC, the organization of General Aideed and Ali Mahdi. They are the one who have controlled the south and Mogadishu. And
USE is United Somali
Association, USC.
Association, okay.
Yes, movement or something like that. And this is more dominant by the HoA clan, as they call it. General Aideed also is HoA, Ali Mahdi also is HoA. So when they took over Mogadishu and so on, and they became very important in Mogadishu, there was a meeting in Djibouti, and General Aideed, he didn't go, and it was not a meeting of USC, but I don't know how that meeting was engineered, and here is the major problem also Djibouti played in the igniting the civil war. In that meeting, that it is out of the blue, that without consulting with General Aideed, they have nominated his opponent Ali Mahdi as the president of Somalia.
And Ali Mahdi was also a businessman, right?
He is a businessman, a hotel owner, and he is also from the USC. From the other sub-clan of USC. And this ignited the civil war in Mogadishu, which destroyed Mogadishu. And they used both of them heavy artillery and so on. So General Aideed was angered, and he said this is illegal, and it was done outside. The conference must be, and if we wanted to appoint that, we have to discuss inside in Mogadishu. But it was made in Djibouti. Why Djibouti have accepted that? Djibouti from that day was always is involved in the Somali affair, not in a positive way, but in a negative sense. And this brought a serious division among the USC, and the war continued, the killing of General Aideed, and it stopped. By igniting that war, it brought, of course, it brought a disaster to southern Somalia, and gradually it also became a famine, of course, came before that, and the intervention of external forces, and particularly United States and 80 countries brought their own troops in Somalia, and what they call Operation Restore Hope, and that had also collapsed, and the civil war continued. And General Aideed, finally, he was killed. And the South became very much divided. As far as Wiyane, long as General Aideed exists, and General Aideed can mobilize the Somali officers and others, including Abdullah Yusuf and this and this. So we have to be very tactical and careful, even though we don't want Somalia to come back. And we need fragmented Somalia to remain for a very long time. But we should not provoke these officers like General Aideed and so on, who can create and mobilize the population and maybe other officers and so on, and they can resist against our policy. So they kept a low profile. At the same time, they continued their secret diplomacy with the different forces which later on emerged. The main objective is that Somalia should be divided, fragmented for a very long time. That is one. Second is, of course, the resources we discovered in Somalia, which is the cause of the collapse of the previous state, that the forces who wanted that resources, they wanted divided Somalia, balkanized Somalia. And the idea developed from a recopied and brought it back is the one, a British advisor. He is somebody born in Rhodesia and later on became as an advisor to the British administration in Eritrea, Sir Edward Terpaskis. He later on, when he left Eritrea, he wrote also a book about Eritrea. He went to South Yemen. When he went to South Yemen, he developed an idea of federation of South Yemen, that taking the most important and delicious part, Aden, out of the federation and keeping it under the British, and then created a federal state, Hadramaut, other places and so on the basis of the clan. Finally, the Yemeni nationalist movement even wounded him that he had to run away from Yemen. That understanding of creating like United Arab Emirates type, that's recycled to Somalia by creating the different cantons and divided Somalia. There should not be any central government, should not be any central army, police, and so on and so on. So Wayane, with his advisors and of course the other big forces who doesn't want Somalia to come back, and they wanted to weaken the Somali body, they continued that by supporting one warlord against another warlord. But TPLF active policy started after 1995 in a very slow level until 1998. TPLF by 1995 became a legitimate government, is a dominant in the name of EPRDF. It organized an election, won the election, and established their so-called legal government. And after 3 years, they went to war with Eritrea. Once they went to war with Eritrea, the Somali file became very, very, very sensitive. Here is that TPLF, it is as a minority, is always frightened against its own shadow. It sees everywhere Eritrea, whether it is bedroom or it is in a sitting room or wherever they walk, there is a shadow of Eritrea which frightens them. They are the one who waged war against Eritrea. So they wanted
in order to rule securely over Ethiopia and then extend hegemony to Somalia.
Indeed.
The TPLF had to destroy Eritrea. That was their plan in 1998.
That is their major policy. So what they did is that for Somalia, from that on, by sending small weapons and so on, appointing a lot of Tigrayan generals in the Ethiopian Somali region in the name of fighting Al-Ittihad. Al-Ittihad, it is another Islamist movement and so on, pacifying the region, occupying and militarizing the Somali region in Ethiopia, and from there making oppression, bringing small weapons to the different warlords, invited them to Addis Ababa and so on, and creating contradiction among themselves, inviting Somaliland, inviting who later on became Puntland, all warlords and so on. And they, in fact, they became the center, and they dictate their view on these warlords who have no patriotic vision, have no long thing. So in the process also that it is the primitive accumulation of capital, as Karl Marx says, the business people became wealthy because they bring the goods, they don't pay tax, and so on and so on. And through this also they have accumulated a lot of wealth in their hand. They don't pay anything, they bring and sell. And the Wayani generals of TPLF generals also, they made money out of it by bringing a lot of contraband goods and competing falsely in the market of Addis Ababa and so on, and bringing a lot of Tigrayan so-called business people to be rich. So the intervention became, so TPLF's vision is simple: dominate Ethiopia with the logo of EPRDF, make sure Somalia become balkanized, make sure no other hostile elements in the region to develop, and quarantine Eritrea in the north. This is the strategy. So the allied, they have to create an alliance, because in the beginning, after Eritrea got independent, it was Eritrea's diplomacy and thinking was building the new Horn of Africa. and that it is absolutely in contradiction with the view of the TPLF. So Eritrea, the dead organization which never functioned, IGAD, was rekindled, and the first, then an Eritrean Secretary General was elected, and so on. And the Eritreans thought that the Somali issue must be solved, Somali vision, that we, the neighboring countries and brothers and sisters, we should give a facility to the Somalis to come and to discuss and minimize their contradiction. We should not put fire or put oil on the fire and make antagonism among themselves. So we should help them. That is the view. But the view in Addis Ababa is totally contrary to this view. One, they want to dominate the Horn of Africa in alliance with external powers. Therefore, Eritrea, after just made their election, they waged war against Eritrea. And that is, they collapsed the vision of Eritrea of building a new economic system. Also, it was quarantined. And Eritrea became the enemy number one. And anything around, they see the ghost of Eritrea. But the main purpose is that we can only dominate, stay in power for a very long time, fragmented, weak Ethiopia from inside, fragmented Somalia by them. It has to continue. And thirdly, also they add, any kind of opposition must be crushed, and Kenya must be part of this project. Not necessarily Kenyan government is involved with them, but by the Ethiopian intelligence, military intelligence, and other intelligence infiltrating Kenya, paying money, killing, assassinating Ethiopian opposition, whether they are Oromos and non-Oromos and this and this. And one of it is that they wanted to assassinate also the former deputy chairman of the Kenyan parliament, Farah Muallim.
Which we interviewed here, yes.
Which interviewed here. So, in total, this policy continued until 2005. By 2005, the TPLF thought we can open a small window and we will make so-called democratic election. And then when they opened that window, that a tsunami came to them, and they were got very much frightened. By 2006, the Islamic Court and the Somali people got extremely tired of the situation with the Islamic Court and so on, defeated the warlords and unified big part of the southern country. And this automatically brought panic, not only on TPLF, but also outside of TPLF, particularly in UK, Europe, and United States. And then this Fraser, the lady, she was responsible for the State Department.
John Di Fraser under the Bush administration. She was Assistant Secretary for African Affairs.
African Affairs. She understood the contradiction and the weakness of Wayani. At that moment also, the economy of the country, Ethiopia, was in a very bad shape. So she touched his back and she told him, enter to Somalia. And of course, it was in my article for anybody who wanted to read in length about this issue. It is published at that moment in 2007 in Global Research, and you can find it in details. So,
yes, we will put the link to that article in the description section.
Can read it and understand. Then it is, they send also special forces. They settled them in Hurso near to Diridawa. They have trained special forces for Ethiopia, for Wayane, and then finally Wayane in 2000.
So if I may interject here, Professor Mohamed, what led to the 2006 invasion of TPLFs of Somalia was the formation of the Union of Islamic Courts that brought some semblance of stability to the chaos in Somalia. They got rid of the warlords. And so can you explain a little bit from where did this Union of Islamic Courts come about? What was their motive? Were they Islamists? Were they affiliated with what later became Shabab? Or were they organic, authentic Sharia courts that provided social services and justice to the people?
Very good. The Islamic court is a combination of a lot of forces. First of all, that it is from the business people, intellectuals, all social classes in that part of the country wanted a state. And they wanted to get rid of the warlords. The warlords, they were warlords. They were troubling everybody. The business cannot go smoothly. They block every area. They put tax of their own and this and this. So the consciousness of the Somali people of all social classes also increased. And the
people got fed up of this era of warlords.
Fed up of warlords and chaos. So the symbolic thing they have started creating to punish this excessive warlord thing, they start creating the Sharia courts. The Sharia courts, they start pacifying and fighting against illegal and criminal elements. Gradually, it got also a mass popular sentiment and a mass basis. And finally, of course, the warlords are defeated by the popular revolt, and it unified the country. All the social classes, including big part of the segment of the business people, joined this movement in order to get rid and eliminate the warlords. This brought a lot of panic, particularly in the United States and UK and so on. And then, of course, within the Islamic court, there were different tendencies. And one of the tendencies is that the Islamic jihadists later on became jihadists al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab in Arabic means is the youth. Later on, which became the military wing and later on split. And the other is the political wing is that Sheikh Sharif and so on, who have been defeated. And later on, 2007, they came, all of them, Sheikh Awais and so on, to Asmara in their conferences. They wanted to do a sort of an alliance of resistance, but that later on was also hijacked and brought to Djibouti, and then another story developed from there. So this is the second time also the negative role Djibouti played on the Somali national resistance against external forces. So when the Ethiopian troops entered there, that it is, and the US sent them in special trainers like Captain Filippo and all this in Hurso, they expected that they can finish it smoothly. But when the war started and the Ethiopian troops tried to enter to Somalia and they couldn't, the resistance became very fierce. The American generals who are stationed in Djibouti, they were very much ashamed and they said, Ethiopia have no army. This is a ragtag. It is those who have never had an army, and they were civilians. They were for a very long time in a civil war. They cannot crush them. It took them very long time to reach until Mogadishu and so on. But TPLF had panicked, and panicked at the same time got support, and they wanted to do in service of their external forces. Jenda Fraser, she touched their back, and they have entered in the quagmire in Somalia. And we have seen what happened in Mogadishu. There was a lot of fight there. A lot of young people of Somalis from Somalia who had been in the neighboring countries came back to fight against the TPLF and this and this. And finally, the TPLF, in the name of bringing the elected federal government, which is carried on by the tongues of the Ethiopians, Abdullahi Yusuf and all this, they were brought in Mogadishu. Inside Ethiopia also, their situation was deteriorating. Deteriorating in a sense that it is the Ethiopian people opposition was increasing gradually. The majority of the people becoming unsatisfied. The revolt in Sidama, Gambela, and so on, accumulated. They could not also solve the problem which they thought that they can crush Eritrea. They didn't succeed. They went to the court. international court. They were defeated legally. They tried all maneuvers. They tried to bring. One of the things I was very surprised, and from the beginning I became very alert. In 1992, I was staying in the Gion Hotel, and I knew somebody from the ELF who was representative of the ELF in Mogadishu. And I saw him drinking tea. And he speaks Arabic. So he came and he said hello to me. We discussed, how are you? And so on, what you are doing? Your case is over. Eritrea is independent. Why you are roaming around here? He said, no. We have an alliance with TPLF. In fact, it is Eritrea. We are going to continue our struggle, and we were invited by TPLF. So you see, TPLF maintained. When you read his interview of 1990, and you see in practice...
You're talking about Meles Zenawi's interview with Paul Henze.
Paul Henze. And his understanding of Eritrea, you could see it there. In practice, I saw the man was there, and I talked to him. I knew him in Mogadishu. So in fact, they kept on dark. They think that nobody knows it, but they know. They kept also so-called elements of ELF, degenerated elements, and they were there in Addis Ababa. So TPLF have mapped out. We can only rule Ethiopia as a minority by divide and rule, first of all. And this policy must be for the whole region. We are minority. We cannot be strong and sit on the top. Therefore, we have to create division, war, conflict, and so on and so on. They cannot sleep one night because
balkanization essentially everywhere.
That is, and this, in this, that the imperialist forces also, they were very happy to having a mercenary which they can give support and does their bidding and their work. So mutual understanding, mutual interest of the minority regime in Addis Ababa and the external forces here became one and the same policy for the region. Now, what's happening in Somalia? After 2006, intervention 2007, finally is the Sharia court was defeated, and then the one wing of it is Al-Shabaab continued its armed struggle and joined the jihadist movement. Now a new element developed. This new element, who doesn't want also peace in Somalia, is the UN intervention, UNISOM. UNISOM have a budget of $6 billion every year.
UNISOM is the acronym of United Nations Somalia Mission, right?
Mission. This is United Nations Somalia Destabilization. It's not a mission. Destabilization mission, I call it. The budget of it is $6 billion.
Per year?
Yes, per year. When we compare after the war after Wayane waged war and invaded Eritrea, and finally they were defeated. One of the proposals after the Algiers Agreement is to bring the UN peacekeeping force in Eritrea. Mm-hmm. And they really brought also that the 25-kilometer Eritrean troops have to keep distance.
The buffer zone, temporary military security zone, what have you.
Yes, it is about...
You're talking about AMI, for short, the United Nations mission to Eritrea and Ethiopia.
But they brought them and so on. And they just stayed there. So Eritreans were clever enough to say, your mission is finished. You have to go. You didn't come to live here.
After 2007, yes.
Yes.
Eritrea, in fact, I think is the only country that said, mission is over, you have to leave, otherwise
yes.
Most United Nations peacekeeping forces stay there for a long time, don't they?
Yes, it became by itself an economic interest for those so-called UN mission people and all this, where they can accumulate wealth. It became a job creation. So the Eritreans, they said, no, your mission is over, take all your goods and leave. Normally also in Somalia, this UNISOM must leave Somalia, and I'm demanding now. because it is a parasite class combined of so-called Europeans and American interests, other forces. They came there, they don't do anything. $6 billion they are accumulating, they are and so on. There is using it for personal aggrandizement, and not only that, the troops on the ground are Ugandese and Burundi. For Burundi, one of their national income, it is these are troops in Somalia. If these Burundi troops leave Somalia, there will be a very serious crisis in Burundi. President Formaggio, he went to Burundi and he talked to him. The man begged him, he said, if you kick my soldiers from Somalia, I will be in trouble here in Bujumbura. So they have no other income. Not only him, also Ugandese troops. They don't do peaceful. There were a lot of them killed there by Al-Shabaab and so on. So one of the pillar of destabilization in Somalia is UNISOM. There is Ethiopian troops, Ugandese troops, and Burundi's troops, who doesn't do anything, and they are not keeping peacekeeping. In fact, it's a parasite, and the top is that white people around, Americans and British and so on, they wanted to rule Somalia indirectly. So once TPLF project collapsed, and it is the Sharia court defeated the warlords, and it created nationalist sentiment in the country, they have now to refabricate a new type of occupation force, and that is UNISOM. And they thought they will continue for a very long time. And big budget also is allocated to them from European Union and United States, Australia, Japan, and so on. The so-called rich countries are providing money and logistics for this. And gradually, that everybody sees that UNISOM is in fact is a factor of destabilization rather than a factor of stability. Second, the major thing that it is UNISOM and all its forces and the external forces, they didn't want to build, or that President Formaggio is trying to build the national army. They were the obstacles of the national army, because they knew that they will be redundant, and the Somali National Army can take over its own peacekeeping force inside the country. It can protect the border of Somalia and so on. And with this, Kenya have entered also with a new project of her, with the Jubaland, and the ambition to have also the Somali gas on the sea. So this is it. TPLF continued with this policy. It sent also its own troops, and there is even an envoy, a colonel who cannot even, an illiterate colonel Tigrayan. He was indirectly
Gabre, they called him the Somalis, Gabre Xavier, I think, Garazgier or something.
Yes. So, which is now is in prison, I don't know, or...
Well, he was later removed from Somalia, went to IGAD, and then IGAD also fired him, I think.
Yes, I think that he's also in the list of the people. So, TPLF, when it collapsed by popular revolt from 2014 until 2018, and it was collapsed, then the possibility of TPLF that it is to destabilize Somalia was dwindled and disappeared. Of course, Dr. Abiy, he was became elected prime minister, but probably for the first 1 year and so on, he himself is under quarantine and so on, and he couldn't he have to liberate himself before he follows policies according to the speech.
Yes, I think it was the first 3 months were very, shall we say, very trying times for him, in which he was trying to assert himself, and the security chief, Getachew Assefa, was trying to bog him down, to sabotage him. But finally,
the man is brave.
He kicked it, fired the security Tigrayans.
They wanted to continue the same. They wanted Dr. Abiy to be the same type of prime minister as his predecessor,
Haile Mariam Desalegn.
and that they didn't succeed. Second is that it is at this particular time, Ethiopian policy and Dr. Abiy's policy is not based on destabilization of Somalia. Then they don't send the Tigrayan generals from that region, they were removed. And now,
of course, the Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed's bold move to make peace with Eritrea was a devastating blow to the TPLF also. We should not forget that.
That is the biggest blow for the TPLF. So which brought TPLF into a stage of panic, an extreme panic. And once they went into the region, they couldn't read the map, the new map of the region, that it is history is bringing a new vision, even though it had always been an old vision of Eritrea, the new Horn of Africa, and they could not read because this minority criminal gangs, they have no other solution unless they have to be eliminated. Finally, they eliminated themselves, and they went to war against the army, which they themselves created and trained, subsidized, and used Ethiopian people's money, and 80% of the army equipment was stationed at the border with Eritrea. And finally, they have to fight against this army and kill this army, and so on, which they lived with them for the last 22 years. And finally, the demise of TPLF came. On the other side is Somalia also relieved by TPLF's removal by the popular revolt and the coming of Dr. Abiy as the prime minister. The stability in Somalia gradually started. I went to
return. In fact, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's one of his first foreign trips was to Somalia, and
indeed. But Prime Minister Abiy doesn't believe. He believes in peace, and he believes also that the region, the people of the region, they have to work together. It is totally different understanding than the minority who is frightened, who is sitting on the top and looting and killing, and always is frightened that it is the people who revolt against them, who doesn't have any project except they became an organ of external forces to destabilize the region. But the idea of the whole people of the region that they can work together is there, and everybody can see it. And of course, Prime Minister Abiy, he understood the mechanism to remove this totally from the region, is first to build peace, and then the tripartite with Eritrea, and second, the tripartite agreement which they have signed with President Farmajo, Prime Minister Abiy, and President Elias. This became the new vision of the region. Now, of course, TPLF is not there, and it have disappeared. There will not be a big obstacle gradually to build a confidence-building diplomacy, economic relation of everybody. They're using the resources, the human and the natural resources of the region. It will alleviate very soon the life of the population. So the people of Horn of Africa now have to think in a wider stage. They should not think in terms of a very sectarian way of thinking. The region is one, the people of the region is one. By cooperating, we can build in a faster rate, and we can catch up our resources, our human resources, and so on, our culture, our diversity. It is a wealth for us. If we can work together, combine all these elements, we will make a difference in the region, and the region can make difference in the world. That old technique of minority regimes always attached as an aligned organ of external forces in our region, the demise of TPLF has ended. And there is no possibility now that you can return history back. What is happening now? The Somali army is also rebuilt in Somalia. It's supported by Eritrea. Of course, Turkey is there and is getting stronger. Now the naval force also is built, and so on. So segments who have been used, that it is a free ride in the time of warlordism, and after that also they have tested the power of what to be ministers and president. This they got frightened now, and they start confronting President Farmajo. But President Farmaajo have a very serious popular support from the masses. The masses in Somalia support President Farmaajo, not because of President Farmaajo alone, because the concept of patriotic nationalist sentiment, Somali national sentiment, came back. There is a huge number of students and intellectuals. People are fed up of the last 30 years balkanization of the country. They want a state, they want to live normal life and so on. And here is that neither UNICEF nor the old and those who are connected to the external forces, they don't want stability in Somalia. And they see also, if they don't trouble President Farmaajo now, by next year and 2 years and so on, that the country will be extremely stable and so on, and they will be eliminated politically, culturally, psychologically, because the change in the Horn of Africa, it is a real change. You cannot reverse it. And that is why now elements in Mogadishu and other places frightened, wanted to create trouble, but they are not able to create trouble. These are very middle, backward people, very selfish, unpatriotic elements. They have no idea for themselves and for their country. The very strange thing of it is that their families are living in a very safe places in UK, United States, and Canada. They put their families outside, their children outside to study, but they go and come back, and they don't want that it is the ordinary Somali people to have peace and to start a new life. I think as game over, not only to Wayane, but also game over for this rubbish parasite class in Somalia, and I don't think that they can turn the wheel of history back. The Horn of Africa, the new Horn of Africa is back, whether we like it or not. The other is that it is...
We will go in depth in the next segment of our discussion of the recent period, the election of President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, known as Farmaajo. I think it's now 4 years, right? So
indeed, yes.
Another cycle of election is coming. Yes. Why it was postponed. We will go into that in next week. But before we conclude now, you have laid the ground for us well that Somalia is finally rising from the ashes like the proverbial phoenix bird, reconstituting state formation, nation building. The economy is on the rise. Recently, though, there has been a lot of propaganda and disinformation with the demise of the TPLF last 2-3 months, that Somali troops have been involved there. What do you make of these charges, and who are spreading these kinds of propaganda and disinformation?
There are several groups. First of all, what it frightened them in the beginning is that in that 30 years, the only head of state who had visited Somalia is President Elias. That shocked them.
Mm. Well, a minor correction. Before President Elias visited, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had also visited. Yes,
indeed. What I'm talking about, in a sense, is that it is President Elias stayed for several days.
Yes. It was not an in and out type of visit, but...
No. That was a real visit, you could say. It's a real visit.
A state visit, yes.
State visit. He met his previous friends. He visited around. He is known for the Somali people. He knows a lot of people. It's not a state visit only. He wanted to see. When he was young, he used to come there a lot. It is part of his home. So he knows the Somali people personally. He knows their psychology. He knows their what they want and so on. The relationship between the Somali people and the Eritrean revolution are interlinked very deep. And then it is not a symbolic visit. It is a visit to tell them, game is over. We are going to start a new start. And this created an atmosphere. When I went after President Isaias visited Mogadishu, just the 2 days after President left, I came to Mogadishu. And it was the discussion was about the visit of the president and so on.
It made an impact on the population, the average person on the street.
Because they see him as part of themselves. They don't see him as a person who is very far from them. So one of the understanding is that Eritrea understood and know how the Somali society functions and how the mechanism in Eritrea and in Ethiopia and in Somalia functions. So Eritrea said, we will train for you. As you helped us in the past, we also have to pay you back. We will help you to establish or to train your military.
The national army.
And the national army. So Eritrea's contribution was on that path. Then a lot of young people were brought to Eritrea and they were trained. Now they knew they are trained, and there are also some Somali troops who are being in training and so on. So they coined it and fixed it that these soldiers also participated in a war in Tigray. This is the nature of these liars and propagandists, because they don't want, because they knew that it is gradually Somalia stability, the creation of Somali National Army, the creation of Somali National Intelligence, and so on, will control Somalia, and this parasite will be eliminated. One is that UNISOM, the other is other forces who doesn't like the Horn of Africa to be stable, the people of Horn of Africa to work among themselves as brothers and sisters. So it is from that point of view, the propaganda, the usual propaganda. Now they coined it. It's not only the Eritrean troops have entered in Tigray, but also Somali troops. It is an alliance between Formaggio and President Isaias against the TPLF or Tigrayan people. This is just they succeeded in order to, but they cannot change the growth. TPLF doesn't exist. It had vanished, evaporated like water, and now we are in the process of a new development. And this new development, nobody can reverse it. There are forces who try to use the weakness or to use to destabilize. And one of these forces who try to destabilize Somalia, basically it's not Kenya is the face, but it is United Arab Emirates. I wish United Arab Emirates leadership, they should refrain from this intervention. Somalis are their brothers. We could work together with them. Why they wanted to destabilize? Because that they have put in a condition of President Formaggio, telling him that it is he have to chase away the Turks and the Qataris. Somalia is a sovereign nation. They can do their relationship with anybody they wish. They are not intervening in the United Arab Emirates interest or and so on. So United Arab Emirates also is playing a dirty role there. I hope that is the leadership in United Arab Emirates will keep refraining not to damage the historical relationship between these two people. And in the past, they have a mutual understanding and so on between the Somalis and United Arab Emirates. I wish that it is the leadership in United Arab Emirates will think twice before that this antagonism reaches into another stage. Thank you.
Very well. With that, we will conclude this segment, but we will go in depth into the economy of the current economy of Somalia, the political situation, the preparation to the election, which has been postponed, just like the Ethiopian election was postponed due to COVID. I suppose and many other things, these regional issues and the growing cooperation of the New Horn of Africa in the next segment next week, inshallah. Until that time, we bid our viewers stay well, and we wrap up this segment of our focus on Somalia. Until next time, I'm Elias Amare. Goodbye. Salam.